other thing that I reclaimed was part of my voice. I had been very active politically many, many years ago. I was a child of the 70s. And while I was married, we were on different sides of the fences. And so we never discussed it. I remember the first time I was with a group of friends post divorce and started talking about it. And one of my closer friends said, I didn't think you had an opinion about any of this, because I had always been so silent and just didn't want to get into it. So older divorces are growing, and I think they doubled um, in occurrences between like 1990 and 2010, but they still are the greatest segment of people getting divorced today. I think something like 36% of all divorces, at least in the United States, are gray divorces. I know you don't have all the answers right now, but you had dreams prior to this marriage about what you wanted and who you were, and do you remember what those were? Does any of that still have interest to you? What do you want? If you get to have a do-over, it's not, oh my God, I have to. You get a do-over. What would you like? And then there are those people who perhaps have no insight into the financial well-being, how their financial well-being is going to take place post-divorce. And what we do know about women who are older and get divorced is that a larger percentage of them suffer a significant decline in their cost, in their standard of living. Slow down, take care of yourself, be with people who you trust, people who are not going to tell you what to do, who can just allow you to be in that place and sit.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Just Separated podcast. I'm Karen Oman, a thanatologist, grief counselor, divorce strategist, and co-author of the Just Separated workbook. I help people navigate the emotional, legal, and practical challenges of divorce, including high conflict and narcissist relationships. Each week, I am joined by expert guests to share guidance, tools, and strategies so you can move forward with clarity, confidence, and resilience. Follow Just Separated and join us as we explore the many layers of divorce. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hi, welcome to the Just Separate podcast. I'm your host, Karen Oman, co-founder of the Divorce Workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about the gray divorce, and our expert guest is Sue Horwitz. Sue is a certified life transitional divorce coach and mediator. She became a coach to kick off her second act when her spouse of 30 years abruptly left the marriage. She believes divorce doesn't have to define a mature woman. It's an opportunity to create the life of your dreams, even if you forgot them. She is a mom, mother-in-law, and a Grammy to two adorable girls. Sue, welcome to the Just Separate podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you.
Sue, you often say that divorce doesn't have to define a mature woman, but but it can be an opportunity to find forgotten dreams. So before we dive into the logistics of what the forgotten dreams are, what is something that you have reclaimed since you became ACT?
Oh, great question. Well, one of the things that I have reclaimed is my love of art and practicing art, and doing it, spending more time with art, not only, painting and drawing, but also being in museums or taking artist days and things of that sort. The other thing that I reclaimed was part of my voice. Um, I had been very active politically many, many years ago. I was a child of the 70s. And while I was married, we were on different sides of the fences. And so we never discussed it. And I remember the first time I was with a group of friends post divorce and started talking about it, and one of my closer friends said, "I didn't think you had an opinion about any of this." Because I had always been so silent and just didn't wanna get into it. So, those are 2 of the most visible things for me. Um, I was pretty lucky, during my divorce. I had always owned a business and was pretty accomplished in my previous career. So I was not like many of the people that I coach who have been stay-at-home moms and whose identities are really thrown, into a state of upheaval because they define themselves as mom and married. And I had a little bit less of that in my personal background.
So what can we just define what a gray divorce is? Like,
Sure.
right? Because yeah, I think the stats is what it's 8 to 10 years marriages, but these are what are the average length of these marriages?
So, um, part of the definition is the age, and they are usually divorces over 50 when someone's over 50 years old. And the marriages tend to be longer, let's say 20 to 30, some 40 years. So, in my case, I was right in the middle. I was, um, had just turned 60 and had been married for 30 years. So that was pretty much a classic gray divorce. So the disentangling of the marriage is oftentimes really deep because of how long people have been married, and it's deep um, psychologically, uh, as well as financially.
So you
Or
talked about before we start recording, there are differences, right? Like
right,
as you just said, like the length of time, right?
right,
Like the
right.
amount that you've had invested. So
Yes,
can you talk about the nuances here about how
sure,
it is different so people understand?
sure. So, you know, for the majority of women who are my clients who seek out divorce coaching because they've been in a long-term marriage, there's a significant amount of financial disentangling that needs to occur. Um, and if we take the profiles of a lot of these women who are getting divorced at an older age, as I mentioned, some of them are stay at home moms. They haven't quite entered the working world again. Perhaps some of this is coming about because they're experiencing empty nest and are making a decision. Oh, I need to figure out who I am. That definition doesn't work. Or it could be a person who has been very successful throughout their career, um, perhaps more so than their spouse, and just has decided, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And they're looking to protect what they've created. Um, in their marriage in terms of their wealth. And then there are those people who perhaps have no insight into the financial well-being, their how their financial well-being is going to take place post-divorce. And what we do know about women who are older and get divorced is that um, a larger percentage of them suffer a significant decline in their cost, in their standard of living. I think it's something like women's standard of living across the board changes upwards of 40%, and men, I believe, 22%. So it's a really big factor, and if you haven't been in the workforce or have a sizable Social Security check coming your way, these are all factors, um, as is people's inheritance. So you'll find couples where, let's say, one party has commingled their sizable inheritance to support a family, um, they don't necessarily get that back if the finances have been commingled. So there's a huge financial disentangling that needs to take place. Um, and for women who don't understand how to disentangle that, or, where um, how to make it equitable. I won't use the word fair because this is not a fair process. Um, so it's not straightforward. You meet a lot of women who say, "Well, I want to keep the house," when in fact they might do better by dividing um, stocks and pensions and things like that. So it's not an equal division, even though they think, well, the house is worth this and his stocks and pensions are worth that, so that's equal. And that's not the case. And they need to really dive into that to understand that more.
Is there any other we talked a little bit about before as well as about the health stuff, right?
Well,
So when you've been married, say 25, 30, 35, even 40 years, um, we're getting older, right? And we often think, okay, well, who's going to help us when we're older? So does this come up in their thinking as well?
oh, yes, especially for women. Um, and I think it starts out with, well, who's going to take care of things around the house? I mean, that's the immediate r- reaction that I hear people say, who's going to do this stuff? I don't know how to do this. Um, and they ultimately do figure it out. But in terms of aging, it's a conversation that needs to be had with adult children. Um, and it's something that needs to be looked at in terms of how you're looking at dividing the assets of a marriage. How are you going to take care of yourself? Can you afford long-term insurance if, let's say, there are no children or you don't have a good relationship with your adult children? Things of that sort become really important to look at.
Could that, thinking about the financial and the health concern, is that a reason why some may not get divorced?
Yep. Um, I have talked with many women who are they would love to be on their own, but they are terrified of going through the process because of the finances and whether or not they will be able to take care of themselves on their own. And they don't want to involve children. Um, and they believe that their spouses won't be fair in the dissolution of the finances in the marriage. So, and they stay and they pay a cost because they're stressed, they don't feel well. Um, they tend to have high blood pressure, depression. Um, they talk about weight gain. I mean, weight gain can be a significant problem for both men and women eh, after divorce. So, or when you're depressed.
So that makes a lot of sense, and I want to have compassion for those people because it takes a lot of courage to leave, especially when you've been
Hmm.
married that long. I was
Yep.
19 years, and that was hard for
Yep.
me to. Let's just talk a bit about the kids. So we talk about, society's full of custody under 18, and it's so imperative and stuff. And I'm a thanatologist, the grief world. And have they talked about their adult children? Because adult children and the gray divorce, it does affect them.
It
I
does.
know it does affect them. So do any of them talk about that?
It's interesting. And this is something that I have to relate to my experience because um, there aren't a lot of things I regret or wish I had done differently, you know, but recognizing the effect it would have on the divorce would have on an adult child is far more significant than most of
Mhm.
us are aware of. So it is an area that I talk about with my clients. I invite them to consider, what and how are you talking to your kids about this? Um, you know, when you think about your children and their future, how do you want to um deal with, weddings and grandchildren and all those things that whether you're married to their parent, you're still a co-parent. And I was raised in a generation where you got to be 18 and you left the house and you never came back, and so was my ex. And over time I realized that our divorce did have an effect on our son, um and that he did need some reassurance about what was going to happen and the kind of relationship we planned on having with him. And I think his father and I could have done a better job, and neither of us had those tools. And you know, even though they may be adult and have their own children, at this point, they still worry about, their parents, what their relationship is going to be like. Um, they worry about who's going to take care of either of their parents, because that's a huge responsibility. Um, so I do invite my clients to have those considerations and to try and communicate with a spouse about what they'd like to see happen, um, both financially as well as emotionally and personally with their adult kids.
I believe it's often overlooked.
It definitely is, and honestly, it was not anything I was familiar with, until I started doing my own research. And I have a dear friend who it was one of the first things she thought about for her kids, and that was written up. Those provisions, for her adult children were very clearly spelled out in her divorce decree, and I
Yeah.
never even thought of that. So,
Yeah, I just think even because as I said to you at the beginning of that question, is everybody focuses on the little ones, and
mhm,
that's 100%. You have
right,
to.
right,
They are not cognitively developed as much, and they're still very needing their parents a lot.
right,
But adult children have often been overlooked,
yep,
and there's long term effects of that, right? So,
yes,
um, less time with each parent during the holidays, because if they're married, they have maybe three sets of parents. They got the in-laws, but they've got mom and
yep,
dad. So it's all um so it's a bit more grief there for them. So I'm glad we've talked about that.
yeah, yeah. No, um, it's been a learning experience, managing an adult child separately, on my own. Um, and his family, I'm very fortunate. I have um, a really open son and a wonderful daughter-in-law whose parents were divorced, and they were very clear about how they wanted to work things with me and my ex. So we got good guidance from our children, which was wonderful. But it is something now I think is really important. As I said, I incorporate it into the work I do with my clients.
So does that have any, when you go through a gray divorce, like say you have grandchildren, does that also affect that whole relationship as well?
It can. Um, I had an experience working within a law firm for a while as a divorce coach, and um, there were many cases where grandparents had brought um, motions for visitation with children. So that can happen. I personally have not experienced that with any of my clients. I was kind of a voyeur in the law firm on this because the case was well underway. Um, but it's not uncommon that grandparents, because of the way custody situations occur, no longer get to see their grandchildren. And that's, we know grandparents are really important in children's lives. And so it is important. And I think, having all of those conversations um, can actually be a unifying aspect of a divorce versus as a divisive one like money can be terribly divisive. You still want to do what's right by those children, you know?
Do a lot of, like, you're a mediator as well, do a lot of gray divorce, which I also want to ask, is it rising? And I think it is rising. So you
Yes.
can answer that as well. But do a lot go to mediation? Like, can they, a lot of them work through mediation?
Hmm. A lot of them do. As we see divorce reshaping in, across the world, um, we those of us in the field would like to see fewer divorces take place in court. So, most of my clients do mediation. It's not uncommon for some of my clients to have attorneys go back and forth for them to create something that's acceptable. Um, but they really want to stay out of court because they recognize that um, the divorce will likely triple and quadruple in expense. It's if you are in court, and I've seen plenty of divorces even here in Colorado, which is, it's not like Los Angeles or New York. I've seen many six-figure divorces, 300,000, $200,000, and, people are fighting about things that after a while become kind of stupid, not worth the money that they're spending on it. So, and yes, you're right, divorces older divorces are growing, and I think they doubled um, in occurrences between like 1990 and 2010. Um, but they still are the greatest segment of people getting divorced today. I think something like 36% of all divorces, at least in the United States, are gray divorces.
Is it all because of the reasons you said at the beginning of the podcast?
Most of it. I mean, there's often betrayal. Um, you know, there's often betrayal or financial, betrayals or abuse, whatever you however you label it. Those things take place. Um, there's also, something that was common, that I learned about after my divorce called a runaway divorce. Um, and in fact, the psychologist who coined that phrase, I think she is from Toronto, in fact, and, that is fairly common. It's when most often a male, has an outside relationship, and not uncommon that it's been a relationship that's lasted for many years, and comes home and says, "I'm done with the marriage, and, I'm outta here," and that's it. They rarely the wives rarely have closure or connection again. Um, it's a really difficult situation on the older children because the parent refuses to communicate with the other parent about things that involve, the family. They just completely erase the family.
I just feel the grief and all that. Like, and I've heard these stories as well. I heard a story about at Christmas time, uh, they were married 30 years.
Mhm.
He came home, was away at work, came home. The adult kids were all having Christmas dinner together,
Mhm.
and he announced at lunchtime that the marriage is over.
Mhm.
That
It
was it.
and those are really heartbreaking in that there isn't closure for anyone, and, it creates this situation for the children and the other spouse that everything has been a lie. Um, you really question everything that you've done, and you being as involved in grief and education, all of that, you know how important it is to try and find meaning. What's the meaning in this? And for those people experiencing that kind of um, divorce, it's really difficult to get to that meaning. Um, and that is one of the more difficult situations I find some of my clients dealing with. So, and I know it was for me. My husband was a runaway.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, the only thing that made sense to me was learning about, oh, these people exist. I thought I was unique, and every divorce is unique, but that situation was far less unique than what I knew.
Well, thank you for that. I didn't even know about that myself. So now the listeners will know, and I
Right.
do too. So thank
Yeah.
you for
Yeah.
bringing that up. And I'm sorry what you went through.
Oh, thank you. Long time ago.
Um, so let's switch it to a little bit of more hope, right? So
Okay.
what after? Okay, so after we've talked about all the things that can happen and um, what are the things that help people in the gray divorce get through the gray divorce?
Sure, sure. I think the most important thing, and this is true for most people in divorce, it's that aspect of rebuilding and making some determinations about what you want your future to look like. Um, and I like to start with my clients at the end. In other words, I know you don't have all the answers right now, but you had dreams prior to this marriage about what you wanted and who you were. And do you remember what those were? And, does any of that still have interest to you? Um, what do you want? If you get to have a do-over, it's not, oh my God, I have to you get a do-over. What would you like, I think that's a really important first step because how if you have some vision, it will shape how you go through the process. You'll bring more conscious awareness to it. You'll understand more of what's transpired. And with that awareness, you'll understand the actual conflicts better and be able to say, this is not a place I want to, you know, draw my line in the sand. Uh, that will prevent me from getting to the promised land if I, you know, blow this situation up. So I think that's what's really important. And what happens when you start having that visualization and you start taking those steps and you become really aware about what's going on underneath about what you think you want or the positions you think you have to have um you're able to resolve the conflict with greater ease and more confidence. And you get to what I consider the promised land, which is feeling free, not being as burdened by the conflict um, or the outcomes, even. It's being able to develop that inner strength and that confidence and being able to say, I will achieve what I want. for myself. You know, I think that for most of my clients, they really worry about money. And so helping them understand that money can flow to them from things that are not necessarily obvious when you're looking at a spreadsheet, like that position of I have to have the house, when in fact having the house may not help them down the road. It may be too costly. It may be a burden. So being able to for them to understand, why is this so important to me, and is that real? Do I need to hang on to this, you know, for whatever reason? Or would I rather be able to have money that I can invest in a different way and go about it differently? I know many women who've actually done a lot better once they got through this. Um, and they basically rewrote their money story, you know? So
You know,
many of us left it to someone else to write.
when I was hearing you say all this, I was thinking, and you can tell me, you work with this group, that there's some wisdom or wiseness that comes out. Like, as you get older, things don't seem the same way as when you're in your 30s. Is
Right.
that we've matured, we've grown up, we've gone through a lot already.
Right.
We've seen a lot. So does that also what you hear from your clients? Because we
Oh,
are different as we get older than
sure.
we were when we were 35.
Right. Exactly. Um, I see so many of my clients come into um their own, and their strengths, their agency, you know? One of my clients who was a stay-at-home mother for all these years, had adult children, had grandchildren, um, she had was just terrified, and there were a lot of pensions and all sorts of things that needed to be divided, and in the end, um she was able to take something that she had always wanted to do. She had owned this property, and she wanted to turn it into a working farm, inside the city, and she got that going, and it was successful. And she stayed in her house and fixed the things that needed to be fixed. And slowly she started developing a group of friends on her own. They had done everything as a couple. um she even took a group of women up they call them 14ers here in Colorado. They're 14,000 feet up high mountains. And she was a hiking advocate, but she'd never really done this stuff on her own. And she took a group of 10 strangers from a women's group up one of these mountains on her own as a guide. So, these are things when I met her, she didn't know how she was going to get through this. She could not see her future. She couldn't imagine that he wasn't going to come home. You know, I mean, she was really lost.
Mhm.
And bit by bit, through each decision she had to make, feeling confident about those decisions, doing the research, figuring out, having a plumber come to the house for the first time and being the only person there was a big thing for her.
That's a
And
beautiful story. But what I like is that, and I just want to tell everybody, like, it's micro. It doesn't have to be macro, but little
right,
micros can build into the macro, right?
it's like habit building, I mean,
Mhm.
and that is I think that's one of the most interesting things about all of this is that what I see in divorce coaching is it is one step. That's where the accountability becomes, it's such a little thing. Like, are you going to call the plumber? You need to, and when are you going to call the plumber? And all of that kind of stuff. It's those little things that really do help someone who's gone from defining themselves as so tied to someone else that really helps them gain their agency and make those decisions for themselves. A lot of
Bef-
my clients are doing really amazing things, eh, that I just am so in awe of them. One has traveled and lived all over Europe for the last few years. It was a lifelong dream, um, and has refound her art, and she's selling art, and I mean, it's really interesting.
I think there's research in the death loss, anyways, that
Mhm,
women generally integrate their grief quite well.
mhm,
So your stories that you're telling is exactly the resiliency
mhm,
of women, right?
right,
Because we are tend to be very resilient. I've done a lot of widows and widowers groups, and you know, the women are really pretty strong women. They're
right,
pretty. It's just I like that's why I like the little micro moments because there's a
mhm,
lot of pressure to
yeah.
try to figure it all out at once, and that's why I like what we're talking about. Just little moments to build the macro moments. But
Right, right. And, um, you know, one of the things I find interesting about the gray divorce is, I think they say 37% of men remarry and only 22% of women remarry. And it's so funny, because I mean, obviously I know a lot of divorced women who are older, and, it's funny to hear them talk about, well, would you like to date? Do you wanna remarry? And all of those kinds of things, and I hear some pretty funny stories, like, "Yes, if he lived in the house next door," and, "Yes, if we had separate rooms," and, "I'm never gonna share a bathroom again." So, it's I find a lot of, the women I coach really excited about what they're able to do on their own once they work through the loss of identity and, the loss of a dream. I think most of the women that I know or have worked with, thought they would see their kids married and have holiday tables with their grandchildren there. And some actually do, which is lovely. And there's no reason not to. You just don't have to go home with your former spouse again. So,
before we wrap up, do you have anything left to what we might have missed?
um, I think, well, I want to just say I really appreciate your bringing up the adult children. I think that is really important. And I think that awareness of this um, phenomena of gray divorce is important because it does set the stage for how we're going to deal with older people in society because many more of them are going to be single. It's not going to be mom and dad go live in the facility together. Um, there are more people out there who potentially will need to have figured out how to live on their own. And I think that's important. And I find I participate in women's groups and women's transition networks where there are a lot of single women, and it's amazing to see how they take care of each other and the friendship bonds. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of all of this.
I think that's a good point. I just want to say I had a client for grief from divorce in his 80s.
Oh, wow.
And I had another lady in her 80s. So when you bring up that we're just talking we're also talking people that can be in their 80s that are deciding that
Mm-hmm.
this is it.
Yep.
I maybe it's rare, but I've had two.
That's
So
amazing.
your point is a very good one to bring up.
Yeah.
So I asked this one for everybody who comes on. For someone who is just separated,
Mm-hmm.
whether they left or were left, what advice would you give them to help them navigate those overwhelming early days?
Um, Slow down. Take care of yourself. Be with people who you trust, people who are not going to tell you what to do, who can just allow you to be in that place and sit. Um, do research. We tend to find people in those early days under all circumstances, they rush to get legal support when they may not know what kind of legal support they need. So take a while to think about all of this and to educate yourself, and become introspective, like what's going to be important to you. Um, and really try and anchor yourself in the person you want to be going through this. Because I think that, in my experiences, as soon as you bring uh, somebody who's focused on the legal ramifications of this, we get lost. You get lost in this. We do what our attorneys tell us to do, and that's not necessarily the best way to try and sort this out with your spouse. But I think you as a person need to decide who you want to be going through this and what's going to be in the best interest of your family, whether they're adults or littles.
Well said. So, Sue, where can they get in touch with you and what you offer?
Okay, so I do one-on-one coaching for people before, during, and after divorce. And they can reach me at my website, suehorwitz.com. There's a lot of free resources there, and there's a place to connect with me either through an appointment or you can fill out a contact form. And um, I'm in a number of directories with the certification programs that I've been a part of, so they can find me there as well.
Awesome. We'll put them in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
So, Sue, I'm thrilled that you came on today. This is I see it in the papers, like we're not papers, but in the news
Yeah.
about the gray divorce. And I think you're bringing to light a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about. And I think it would be imperative that if they're thinking about it, that they talk to you and have a consultation, because it is a little different, right? When you're in gray divorce. And that's what we talked about today. So thank you for all the good work you're doing and awareness to such an important topic, right? This matters, right?
Right. Well, and I appreciate you for doing the podcast, and your book is excellent. So I really appreciate your collaboration in this field.
Well, thank you, Sue.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining today's conversation with our divorce expert. Check out the show notes for more about our guests, and don't forget to follow us on Spotify and our YouTube channel, divorceworkshop.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Share your questions, comments, or guest suggestions. And for a complete guide to navigating separation and divorce, check out the Just Separated workbook on Amazon. It covers emotions, co-parenting, finances, legal insights, and recovery. A must-have for anyone going through separation or divorce.